Good morning. And I'll hand over to you to take us through this report. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm just going to give you an update on the PM10 monitoring we did this winter. You've probably heard some of these results already. I think Mark's touched on them, and we've had the odd media release about them, so they're probably not all that new. And I'll also cover an emissions inventory that we did this winter as well, which is an update on previous ones. So just a reminder that PM10 is that very fine particulate matter, less than 10 microns. And I recently went to a equality conference, and the news doesn't get better about the health impacts of particulate matter. It seems to add more and more each time you learn about it. So as I probably raised before, it's associated with cardiovascular disease, respiratory problems and cancer. And now that also possible effects are looking at Alzheimer's, autism, obesity. There's all sorts of things that they're making connections with. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Essentially what it's doing is that it's the body treats the air pollution like a virus or a bacteria. So it's kind of an immune response to it. So it starts, body starts attacking its own tissue. So that's kind of the mechanism for some of these things. Oops. So, and a reminder too of just what the standard, the National Environmental Standard that we are aiming to achieve, which is no more than one exceedance of the standard, which is 50 micrograms per metre cubed in a 24-hour average. Now, the EMF Ministry for the Environment have instigated a review of the standard, so whether it stays as that, it may stay as that, and there may be a PM 2.5 standard added. So, yes, it's kind of watch the space. Our goalposts might shift a bit.
So what happens if, in this report, say next year it's exceeded double, 2 instead of 1?
We still, the slide here down below, the targets for complying with the NS varies for each airshed. So that's the ultimate goal, pretty much for all of them by 2020. Just one exceedance is the aim for the Napier airshed by after 1st of September 2016, after next year. For Hastings, it's 3, so if we had 2 next year for Hastings, we'd still be within that.
Yeah, the question was, what happens? Do they close the Hastings down?
No, that's really, the government's looking at for councils to be making an effort to achieve these standards, which I think obviously we have. If a council was making no effort whatsoever and it was being exceeded multiple times, the government might look at doing some measures, say like putting a commissioner in or something like that. But it's never been, there's no hard and fast, yes, we'll do.
Councillor Scott.
Perhaps either Ms Lambert or Dr Koziol can cover the impact on new resource consents for discharge free in industry within the polluted airshed.
So maybe I could cover that if you like. Yep. So what the National Environment Standard says is that if an airshed hasn't complied with the standard by the required date, so if you gave the example of Hastings, which is required to have full compliance by September 2020. The regulations state that if that's the case, then we, being the Regional Council, cannot issue new consents for air discharges within that airshed. So potentially you are going to significantly impact on industrial activity.
So an airshed is the entire Hastings area, or areas within?
Yes, so there's the 2 principal airsheds being the 2 urban areas, and it's as defined in our plan. I think Councillor Scott's got a copy of the map there that shows the air sheds.
Councillor Barker.
My question relates to that is, how did we come to draw these lines on the map for these air sheds? It seems to me that it's rather arbitrary. And is it possible to vary them? And one would want to, I presume, go a lot further down George's Road and other areas. So it just seems that the air sheds are very narrow. Why are they so narrow?
It's a bad area.
Exclude your house.
I was talking about Rex's.
Oh, you meant Rex's house. Include his house.
Include ours, yes.
No.
But that's the point, is that the air sheds are very narrow.
The air sheds were defined as part of the development of the plan change that brought in these the air quality rules, and that was done as a result of. If we go back to 2004, when this standard was first put in place, you know, we would be the first ones to put our hands up and say we didn't have a very good handle at all on the state of the air quality in Hawke's Bay, and we had to do a lot of, or a significant amount of monitoring to even get some scientific information to justify proposing any changes to the plan. So we were able to get information from emissions inventories, from a significant amount of modelling by Dr. Emily Wilton from Environet, and looking at the areas where, to be able to define the air sheds. Now, those particular boundaries were put out as part of the plan change. I'm trying to remember if there was probably submissions on them. There were. Councillor Scott's nodding. And so, but that's a result of going right through the plan change process. So if you did wish to amend the boundaries, we would first of all need to have some supporting science for that, for the need to either take areas out or extend the boundaries. And then secondly, we would need to go through a plan change process to do that.
I'm not sure that was the question. Yeah.
Yeah, follow-up question for that is that air sheds implies a roof and walls. But this doesn't have any walls. Air moves backwards and forwards. And if you have a look at the map, I was particularly intrigued by the one on page 5. It seems to me that without, look at it, it's just a narrow line straight around the very outskirts, tightly around the outskirts of Havelock North, Hastings, like down Wall Road, and Flaxmere. So we measure inside that, but we don't measure. We have different standards on the outside.
Correct, and the National Environment Standard does as well. So any property over 2 hectares in area is not covered by the NES. So that largely defines the suburban or / urban areas of Hastings and Napier, rather than just the areas where the smoke might either be generated from or travel to.
So we can't. So these definitions are set for us. We can't change them.
Those definitions are in the National Environment Standards, so it would have to be a change to national regulations.
Are you happy to take questions now? Are you on?
Yeah, as we go through, certainly.
First of all, is there a gold standard? I mean, is there some region? I have several questions. Is there a region, such as Christchurch, which I anecdotally pick up little bits and pieces about, but is there some region which has developed a gold standard for air quality?
There are some that have, and ours would probably be included in that have achieved significant reductions in the numbers of incidences they've had. I think the likes of sort of Tasman and Nelson, another region that have done a very good job. There are some, by virtue of their climate, such as Wellington, that don't have many incidences at all, except for included in them is likes of Masterton, and they do have problems at Masterton. Christchurch was significantly improving. I'm not sure, with the earthquake, they started having a number of issues with the liquefaction dust, and they are having a pullback on from the public, from the use of fires, considering what they went through and the problems with electricity supplies. So, certainly all councils have, generally nationwide, there's been a reduction in the number of incidences. Councils have been making concerted efforts to improve.
So, My other question, I guess, and issues that I have, so we've got a plan change with 208, which says that you must have a consent between May and August to light a fire outside, a large fire outside. But, of course, my issue with that is that the fire that affected me, the consent said that the fire had to go, smoke had to go in my direction of my house. So, you know, I have, this is a big issue for me, but I really appreciate the work you do, so don't get me wrong. This is not a criticism of you. I think you do a fantastic job. I just think there's some fundamental flaws in here. And it said, and the rules have been included to ensure PM 10 emissions from outdoor burning on horticultural production land are negligible. I just can't believe that that's in this paper, because it's not. And how do we do this? I mean, when I had my issue, we weren't able to check the PM10 in the fire, which was completely surrounding my house. And just recently I went for a walk through Harware Park just to get a feel for the place, and I was completely smoked out by a fire, an open fire that was occurring at just close to the sports park, so a kilometre and a half away, which was destroying everybody else's ability to do anything within that airshed, if you call it. So right down to the Pakawhai Park from the sports park, the air was totally polluted. So, you know, there's some serious things here that we need to address. I don't want to talk about it when I do want to talk about it, but my question is, how do we do this? How do you regulate large orchard burns such as occurred at St George's Road?
It is a difficult issue, and very much like in your experience, the immediate people around that fire can have significant issues. And with the developments of that plan change, there was, I believe, quite a bit of consultation about that particular issue, and a good practice guide was developed with that sector. Whether they are following it as they should be, may be a debatable issue. Certainly, if anyone experience a problem fire, should bring our compliance team and have them go out there and assess it. I guess the problem is, certainly in these submissions on that plan change, was to a certain extent, what else do they do with it? There's not, if some system could be developed to take that material for them and produce good wood out of it for people to burn, that would be ideal. So I guess, and in a way, if with the NES review, if we, through that, get to review our plan to ensure it meets the new standards that MFE come up with, there'd probably be an opportunity to have a look at that issue.
Can I just ask you to tease that out? Based on Liz's comment that no property over 2 hectares is covered by an NES, so how does that cover Rex? You're over 2 hectares, but they all know where you live now, so you probably drive next time.
No, there's a big fire right next to my boundary about to burn.
I'm just interested.
Sorry, it's I probably should have reread this to familiarise myself with it. I think it's no property over 2 hectares is covered by, is included in the airshed. No, I'm not.
No, I think it is. I think most of those airsheds will be based on census area units, and I guess. I'm not sure about that.
So it's relating to the home fire burners,
burners
and things like
So
that.
the 2 hectares, is only covered.
The 2 hectares were not regulated in the same way as those in smaller areas, and that's why you've got the differentiation of airshed 1 and airshed 2. Certainly airshed 2 does have rules applying to it, but it's that particular domestic burner rule that applies to airshed 1.
Yeah. Okay, so first, that graph there shows the number of exceedances we've had for each year since going back to 2006, And this year, obviously, we've had a very good year. Only the one exceedance in Hastings, that's the best ever. It's the first time that Hastings has complied with the NES. We had no exceedances in Napier, and we have had two exceedances in Awatoto, which unfortunately means it hasn't complied with the NES this year.
The Hastings one, is that,
Yeah.
do they have particular difficulty due to inversion?
Yeah, they've got Napier generally is.
Napier doesn't have inversion, probably.
It does have
Do you have
it does have inversions, but not as
Not as much.
yeah, and it tends to be it's just a little bit windier and a shade warmer than Hastings in winter.
The Awatoto exceedances, can I ask about that? In the air inventory, we haven't done a source apportionment study again. The two exceedances in Awatoto, one was salt and possibly dust, and the other one was dust, which is beyond the ability of the people within the airshed to control the discharges. With the reduction that we've now done in domestic fires, what proportion of our contribution to PM10 is salt? Do ask that question knowing that when we had the monitor up on the expressway, we were picking up quite a high contribution of salt right up that far inland.
Yeah, historically in Napier it's been about 20% of it is salt in Napier and about 10% in Hastings. So it's not a trivial amount, but that generally only means that we have to make more of an effort because not that part is unmanageable, but we still have to get the standard below 50 micrograms per metre cubed. And while the health effects, the World Health Organisation has indicated that they can't see, there isn't conclusive evidence that, sea salt has detrimental effects. I think that's more in relation to kind of pure sea salt standing at the beach, whereas if it does, sea salt actually does react and carry pollutants. So for the likes of coming through the industrial area where you've got sulfur dioxide emissions and sulfuric acid being made there, by the time, and certainly the longer that it passes through that sort of environment, it's basically getting contaminated. So when it gets to say to Hastings, it's not as pure as you might think.
Mr. Chairman, well, my question was sort of further to that, and thanks for that explanation there. But look, the reality is that we get 3-day easterly storms from time to time, and they're going to generate sea spray. And okay, I accept your point that the sea spray may become a carrier of other material that is harmful. The sea spray in itself, I imagine, isn't harmful. But does our monitoring equipment enable us to differentiate between smoke particles and sea spray, for example? Because I can see, it seems to me, that you're going to have a continuing compliance problem with Awatoto from that source.
That's right. The general instruments that councils use to monitor PM10 and monitor PM2.5 aren't able to do that type of source apportionment in real time like that.
They're not?
No. What I am trying to set up for next year is a targeted investigation to give us a year-long investigation whereby that sort of information we will be getting. For that you have to, it's quite manually intensive. You really are using filters and changing filters and things and sending it away to GNS to analyse. And it's a reasonable amount of money to do that. But so we'll do we're hoping to do a targeted investigation to help us on average what the proportions there are. But also what we can do, what we've now got just recently installed is both a PM10 monitor and PM2.5. Now, the majority of salt should be in the PM10 fraction. There will be some in the PM2.5, but if we're getting quite a difference between the PM2.5 measurements and the PM10 measurements, then that gives us a better indication where, it's more likely that there's quite a bit of salt in there. PM2.5 tends to be more from your industrial processes and your motor vehicle emissions and your wood burning, that sort of thing.
Mr. Chairman, I see that as a significant issue that probably has to be considered by us by way of submission in terms of any review of the regulations by central government. Because, Awatoto is a significant industrial area, and if we get to the point where we can't issue discharge consents, then that could have quite a material effect on our regional and local economy.
Yes, but and you can. I'll just qualify that you can issue consents, but that discharge essentially has to be offset by another one. So they'd have to work with another industry for them to reduce their emissions if they wanted to emit a certain amount. So it's,
That is an issue that you intend to investigate and deal with.
Yes.
Councillor Pipe.
Just on that issue again, those exceedances, those two exceedances, did they coincide with a major storm? Do you have any?
One of them, I do suspect was majority of sea salt, but at the time, I think at that water treatment plant that's now going up at Awatoto, there was some earthworks there. So, and to a certain extent, other councils do have issues in their industrial areas with wind-blown dust, and they are going about doing instigating measures to have better site management. So that's, if we found that really it was dust that was always causing us a problem, you could go down that route. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. In this case, did the weather help? To a certain extent, I think it did. It was windier in Napier. It was that it has been probably for the last actually since 2006. It was a shade cooler, but I think wind is the most sort of influencing factor on our PM10 concentrations. So in terms of our characteristic days, which are those sort of black bars, they were lower. Our characteristic days that we might get in exceedance were lower than they have been for a number of years. Not so much in Hastings. They're pretty sort of average actually. It was a shade windier in Hastings than it has been in the past couple of years, but certainly they may have been, because it was very southwesterly, they just may have been a little bit more sheltered than Napier.
A lot of hot air out there.
Yeah. One thing I have been looking at just now actually is the persistence of particular weather systems. And I was looking at the persistence of like the high pressure is when we tend to get our exceedances, and we tend to need a high pressure system to last for 2 days. We only had one high pressure system that lasted for 2 days this winter, and that's when we got an exceedance. And I think that's kind of probably the pattern of the El Nino, the speed at which the weather systems move through. Whereas in previous years, that they've lasted 4 or so days. So I think we were lucky in that respect. And if we sort of take out the weather, average the concentrations for the exceedance days that we had each year, there's still at both Napier and Hastings a general downward trend in our concentrations, which is a good thing.
Do you consider St John's as a good measuring point in Hastings, given that the industrial area is a significant distance from there?
We did put out 6 extra monitors out in Hastings, generally all around the place, and for 2 months last year, and we found that because you need to put the monitor in the place where basically the conditions are the worst. And St John's was pretty much there. Yeah, it was good. Both the modelling and this monitoring indicated that it was sort of reasonably located, that St John's monitor. Now I'll get on to the emissions inventory. Now this is an exercise done by Emily Wilton at Environment Limited. It's essentially just a desktop exercise where she estimates the emissions from various sources, such as domestic heating, industry, motor vehicles and shipping. Some of it's based on modelling, like the motor vehicle ones. Industry, she calls around all the industries and gets their emissions information off them. And she looks not only at PM10, but also nitrogen oxide, sulphur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and volatile organic compounds. And we had this done, we're trying to do this every 5 years to give us an indication of how things are going, whether our policies have been effective. So we had it in one done in 2005, 2010. Essentially, based on her calculations, domestic heating, the focus here is winter. Domestic heating still contributes the most to our winter PM10 emissions. Now, this doesn't account for natural sources at all. So we're just talking about the proportion of anthropogenic emissions.
Just a question,
I think perhaps, am I correct that there's the answer to Councillor Hewitt's question, that in spite of the reduction that we have done in the proportion of wood burners, that it's still domestic heating that is the main driver of the problem?
Yeah.
Not industry.
No.
So just on that point,
Sorry, Councillor Belford.
I was just looking up up those numbers. They're spread through this report. The industrial per night is 29 kilograms of PM10 per night, 29 in Napier, 4 in Hastings per night. The wood burning in the homes, Napier is 587 kilograms per night, and Hastings is 679 kilograms per night. So they're almost incomparable. I mean, in terms of what the impact is, it's all coming from wood burning in homes. This trivial amount, but that was the politics of the issue when this was accepted, that there were sectors that would be potentially penalized. And an industrial applicant, for example, could be penalized on the basis of home wood burning that they had no control over.
But isn't it true that that you can't measure, that you're not, or whether you cannot, well, you can't at the moment with your, when you don't, measure the PM10 on orchard fires?
Not specifically, no.
So that line might be, that's very hard on the house burners, isn't it, on the home?
Yes, her rationale is that based on the rules of the air plan, the orchard fires should not be making a significant impact on the air sheds. Not to say that they aren't making an impact on the people around them that may just be outside the air shed, but on the air sheds themselves, where we're doing our monitoring.
Okay, so this does just refer to the air shed?
This refers to the air sheds, yeah.
Yes, so I've got a question about this as well. So that's based on modelling as to what the sources of PM10 are or might be.
Oh, and also not just modelling. With regards to the domestic heating, they do a telephone survey. So that's information gauged from the telephone survey. It does rely on people being honest in their answers,
Yeah.
and then applying no emission factors to the types of burning that they're doing.
But you can't confirm that from your actual monitoring of the air sheds because you're not doing any analysis of what you're picking up, like hence the conversation about percentage of salt, for instance.
Yeah. But in replying to Councillor Scott's question about the sea salt, at that time when we did that study, they also did this sort of thing. They were able to attribute the sources, and again, domestic heating was the majority.
Yeah, so, because you talked about the percentage that's caused by vehicles and how that's done from modelling, but we now know that, for instance, some vehicle manufacturers lie about
Well, yeah, but that's
what they're
right.
producing, so
That's
they're
right.
completely unreliable figures in my view. And it also doesn't take into account how well maintained a vehicle is, or whether it's driving in the country or in the town. So
Yeah.
that's just it's a guess really.
But to a certain extent too, that it's a general estimate. Also for the domestic heating, they apply certain emission factors, and that doesn't account for people burning wet wood or in the way that they're burning either.
But, I mean, the key takeout is what Councillor Belford's talking about, which is clearly there's a primary source.
Yeah.
Just, so it's not a question as much as a suggestion. When I saw your pie charts, I thought the presentation could have been given a slightly different twist in that if you put the pie chart for 2010 underneath the pie chart for 2015, although the proportions haven't moved dramatically, the total value has shrunk significantly.
That's right. That's right.
It would give you a completely different impression of that, because that would show you that we've still got high levels of domestic emissions, but in actual fact the proportions have dropped by over half.
The emissions have dropped, but the percentage contributions are remaining relatively static.
Yeah.
But overall, what matters is that the concentrations are coming down.
Put a pie chart on top of that, you see a much smaller pie, but the proportions will be roughly the same. So it's a dramatic change.
Yeah. And that's probably, I might have that in the next slide, showing you that there has, in terms of our total PM10 emissions, they have come down, and in terms of the PM10 from domestic heating, they certainly have come down. So that's about 58, depending on which city you're looking at, 58 to 66% over 10 years. So roughly 6% per year, and that actually that's roughly in the same realm as what I'm seeing in terms of the reduction in, say, the maximum PM10 concentrations we're having over those 10 years, roughly around sort of 4-5% for the average and the maximum PM10. So they're kind of telling a similar, both the monitoring and the emissions inventory, a similar sort of a story.
Follow-up question. Other areas in New Zealand will be undertaking a similar program. Are we meeting the same rate of success that they are?
I would say probably better than some. We've kind of been faster on the uptake than some of them for doing it, and with Mark's program, he's been very successful in getting conversions, so he's been doing a good job.
Well, I would have thought a 50% reduction in 5 years is dramatic. No other word for it. Dramatic. It's very good.
Yeah, it's very pleasing. So essentially the main points from the emissions inventory is that domestic heating is still the main source of emissions of PM10, and plus some of the other contaminants. We've got shipping and transport tend to be the most for the sulphur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. Both the PM10 total emissions and the emissions from domestic heating have declined over time, and the numbers of the wood burners reducing, and certainly the transition from old wood burners to new wood burners is increasing. And generally, the emissions of all the other contaminants have declined over time, and that is things like improvements with the fuel and the what we think are the improvements in the vehicle technology contributing to that. So essentially, in summary, it's been a very good winter in terms of the health of our air for the residents of Napier and Hastings. It's the first time that both Napier and Hastings have complied with the NES for PM10, so that's been great. And certainly the emissions inventory has shown that the Hawke's Bay residents are taking up the challenge and converting to cleaner forms of heating.
Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, just one question. The distinction between PM10 and PM2.5, which is your two measures, is how safe is 2.5 compared with 10? Is it like 4 times safer, or?
No, PM 2.5 is worse. That's
2.5 is worse.
yes, because the smaller 2.5 indicates it's a smaller particle. So PM10 is less than 10 microns. PM2.5 is less than 2.5 microns. The smaller it is, the further it can get down into your respiratory system, and even the really ultrafines can get into your bloodstream. So they have more potential for harm. That's why the Ministry for Environment are considering a specific 2.5 standard.
Councillor Bell.
It seems to me when Mark has presented about the program itself, that the increasing difficulty is that the averages look great, the result is dramatic in an average sense, but there are still these very significant pockets where the health problem is probably as severe as it was when we started 5 years ago. And so do we really have any, at this point, let's say we got the low-hanging fruit here in this program, and you see the household numbers, have certainly dwindled, but it's down to the hard core in a way. And what are our plans? How are we going to go about that? I mean, that's not your territory. You're just giving us the results here. But from the council standpoint, is there more? Is it going to get harder to improve these numbers? And is there anything else we could actually be considering doing about it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, look, probably for a detailed answer to that, Mark would be the best person to answer, but having had some conversations with him about that issue, certainly in terms of now having a significant amount of information about through our own systems, but also working with the TAs on where fireplaces have been removed and new ones put in. We've got a fairly good geographical understanding now where a lot of the changes have occurred, and conversely, perhaps where they haven't occurred or not in sufficient quantity. So I think that Mark's certainly looking at developing, if he hasn't already, a program or to target specific areas, geographical areas of both of the airsheds, to see if you can get that, those tougher nuts to crack. But bearing in mind also that for a lot of them, there's likely to be some financial constraints to them being able to change. So looking at also how he may be able to, through third-party funding, assist with that as well.
Do you know offhand if there's a requirement that public housing must meet these standards, or? Housing
New Zealand and locally have been excellent in doing this. They were one of the first to take up the challenge, I guess, and so all of their, certainly their new housing and certainly the retrofitting of their existing housing stock as it's taken place in those airsheds, they've ensured compliance with our requirements.
Just to follow up on Councillor Felford, if I may, it seems to me that the lowest relative drop in emissions is in Havelock North. That's what the stats show. My reading of it, is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So do we have a strategy particularly for Havelock North? I wouldn't have thought that was an economically stressed environment. I would have thought
Struggling masses there.
Struggling masses.
Struggling millionaires.
But do we have a specific? I would have thought that it would, for Havelock North, you would have a targeted program for them in some ways. It seems to be an area
again, probably Mr. Heaney would be the best person to answer that. But if that's come up through the work that Kathleen and Emily have done around the areas where there's been a lower rate of reduction, then certainly I'm sure he'll have something in mind for out there. And it could just be as much as a targeted mail drop. Are you aware that we have a Heat Smart program, and are you aware that these rules kick into place on the 1st of January next year, because in fact we have the final set of phase-out rules take effect 1st of January 2016, and that will that always triggers quite a high uptake for a short time.
Well, the figures defy sort of what people would initially presume, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Mr. Morty.
There's still a misunderstanding out there. And I recall you and I going to Camberley 7 or 8 years ago and being abused by the old Pākehā people that were keeping them cold by putting in these, what were going to be new conditions in their fires. And let alone when you get to the darker races, it's even less understanding of the actual health problems involved in it. And then, of course, you've got, with Māori and Pacifica, you've got a higher rate of rentals. So how does it get around with rentals?
That's probably the biggest challenge of all. And how can you encourage the private landlords to do this? And certainly there's been some initiatives coming out of central government in the last few months that may help with that, the requirement for houses to be insulated within the next couple of years, I think it is. So not so much clean heat, but certainly the warmth side of things, the insulation side of things. But we do have, again, some targeted campaigning towards private landlords as well.
Those blankets that we originally got in 1840 are quite useful.
Could you pass them on?
It's still going. Any other questions? You're happy to move, Councillor Graham. Thank you. We have a seconder for that. Thank you. Councillor Scott, you wish to speak?
I think your team does a really great job, and appreciate it. And you're probably right, we are leading edge. But from my perspective, we're still a long way to go. And we saw that email traffic between that fellow, Christian was his name, what's his name?
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
Who's an international expert on this. And he said his view is that we're a long way from understanding how dangerous these particles are, and I think that's probably right. I think that we're at the embryo stage of where we're going on this, on air quality and understanding it. And even the fact that we focus, because the plan says we have to focus just on the air sheds, is in itself an oxymoron to me, who sees all these fires all over the place. And we're not even focused on them. So I think this is a great beginning. It's my intention to make this an issue, and I'm going to go for it. Well, it'll cost me a few votes, but I'm going to make it an issue. And because nobody has the right to pollute the air in Heratonga or Wairoa or Central Hawke's Bay. Nobody has a right to do that. And that's my final statement on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a really interesting report. Thank you, Dr. Koziol and Kosniak. I did find Dr. Wilton's report one of the harder ones to read than I've had from her, but there was a lot of useful information in it. One of the things that you've highlighted today is how far we've come since we first did this and since the MFE first introduced the NES on air with our knowledge of health impacts. And I think that we're in a very different space than we were at that stage. And I would hope when such time as the 2.5 or less than 2.5 microgram issue is addressed, the health board here are actually on board a little bit more actively than they were when we actually did the initial, which I'm sure they will be. I'm really pleased when I saw this, what the reduction in the overall emissions had been. And it certainly is dramatic, and certainly the effects in bringing down our compliance is great, but we only just sit under that 50, and so we'll be doing better when we get there. We have actually looked at, through reports that Mr. Heaney has, of those, how we tackle those that are refusing to change. It's quite alarming to find that there's something like 11% of the pre-2006 burners still being actively used, and they should have been phased out. And we have had discussions already in council as to how much we look at following up with a hard line. It was always our intention in council to take the non-regulatory approach first and the carrot and the assistance in it with changing, and I think that has been very effective, but we still have that remaining, but that is still contributing very severely to a polluted airshed. One of the consequences for industry, and luckily the government did soften up on this, because there was originally to be no consents for industry if we had a polluted airshed. Actually, we now are limited to emissions of less than 2.5 milligrams from any new emission, and that actually means that we can enforce best practice on industry, which in itself is actually not a bad limit. So it just means any new industry actually has to be really measuring up to best practice. Otherwise, then they have to go into the offsets. I do question the Havelock North one, that they have a totally different housing stock, and consequently their profile of the types of burners that are using and type of heating they're using is quite different, because it's a far more recent housing stock there than the other airsheds, so I'm not surprised, but we do have to tackle those that still are using open fires and the early wood burners. So that's something for council to solve in the future. But a really good result, and we are contributing very positively to the health and well-being. And I would add that our program of the tying it to the heating program is probably one of being not only the most effective, but has actually raised probably the health and well-being of people around here, and is something we should be really proud of.
Thank you. Other speakers? I'll put that motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Now we've got a couple of
Thank you.